going to share with you some simple tips, some easy things that you can do to get you hitting this thing better. It's not an easy club to use. I know that I've struggled with it in the past, and I'm sure many of you are struggling with the driver. So if you're struggling with the driver, we kind of have to make some changes, because if we don't, nothing will change. You'll continue to hit it poorly. When we set up over a golf ball, we know that our golf swing is around about a second just over. Start to finish, it's over pretty quick. But most of that second is the downswing. So me telling you to do some things in your downswing will take time. You'll have to go to the practice area, you'll have to drill them in, you'll have to then build up the speed, take it to the course. It can take weeks, it can take months. If I tell you to make a backswing change, much easier. Backswing is slower, takes more time to think, less force is involved, much easier. So I'm going to give you 3 backswing tips and drills that can help you straighten out the driver and specifically get rid of those big fades and slices that I know many of you are struggling with. Number 1, club face. So let's get our setup. When we get to our first checkpoint in our golf swing, which is when the club shaft is around about level with the ground, where is that club face? Our club face can be neutral, we kind of want that. It can be a little closed, that's not horrendous, or it can be open, that is horrendous. We need to avoid that one. And that one, unfortunately, is the most common. So we often see a golfer roll the club away, often coincides with the lead shoulder getting high, club getting maybe too far inside, but effectively my golf club faces up towards the sky. If we can change that, we control the face better. If we can control the face better, guess what? We get more control over the golf ball. So the first little drill I want you to do, and this is more a feeling, an exaggerated feeling, but it's really going to help you. Take a setup, take your trail hand, and imagine you've got a golf club. A little bit of flex in that trail arm and open up the palm. Palm should face the middle of the fairway or your target. Now, many of you, when you take the club away, will overly fold and rotate this arm. So when I do that, you can see that my palm faces up towards the sky and my elbow sits down. What I'd love you to try and do is I want you to be folding the arm. That's really important. I don't want you to bend the arm, big difference. So folding the arm, which means that the elbow continues to point down at the ground. But as you're doing that, I want you to feel like the palm starts to point more down at the ground, as you can see there. So I'm making my little rotation, my arm is folding, but my palm is staying down at the ground. Now this is a great little exercise for you to do. If you're someone who struggles with that club face control, no issues with you making it more extreme if you want to get that feeling, but let's move away from palm up to the sky. When you bring the golf club back in, what does that look, and certainly for you, what does that feel like? Well, if I did that, palm a little bit more down at the ground, look at the club face, also pointing down at the ground. Your right palm is pretty much going to be a reflection of where the club points, provided your grip is fairly neutral. So if you can get yourself to this takeaway point with the club face pointing slightly down at the ground, for me, that's a great checkpoint, and it means that we've got the golf swing off to the best possible start. So let's go ahead and hit one. This is, how goes this hole? 3rd hole on the dunes at Costa Navarino. Let's go ahead and rehearse it. There's my club face position, work it up. And that allows me to hit drives like that. Second point and the third point kind of bit intermingled. The second point is really going to help us as we move on to the third point. But it's to do with knee flex and it's to do with the hips. If your lower body, knees, hips, they don't move correctly, it's near impossible to get your upper body to move correctly. It's just not going to happen. So you might have upper body faults, which actually are a result of the lower body not moving correctly. And the real fault that I see, especially with driver and especially with those golfers who miss it on the right, is just lack of movement in the knee and the hip. The more I lock this knee in place, this hip in place, generally 2 things will happen, or I should say one of 2 things. We often get a slide, and you can see that I've kept some flex and this in place, but I've been able to slide. Or what we often get is the turn becomes very, very flat. And you can see how the shoulders turn flat, and actually that can open the face, which we've already covered in point 1. But the problem with this is that when I've made a flat turn, what am I going to do in transition? Well, I can't keep that flat turn because that means I'm going to swing, some 3 feet above the ball. So what would I do in transition? Well, I'd have to lunge my upper body back down. And what does that do to the club? Throws it on the outside and we get the club steepening and chopping across. And sometimes you can watch your swing on video and you can see this kind of over the top move. You can see your upper body kind of lunging at the golf ball, but you actually don't see the real reason that's happening, and it can be the lower body. Watch what happens to my upper body if I let my lower body turn correctly. Knees change flex, hips turn on an angle. Well, suddenly my upper body is able and it's allowed to move correctly. I've turned well, I've got a good amount of turn, but I'm turned on an angle. And you can see, and this is a checkpoint that I look for, some daylight between the knees. It's not essential, depends a little bit on your flexibility, but for the majority of people watching, creating a movement where you get some daylight between the knees is really, really helpful. And it will actually change what your upper body does. So as I set up, I'm trying to feel like my knees change flex and my hips turn on an angle. And then once I've got that feeling, get the lower body working better, good things will start to happen. This is a biggie. This is a big one. Get this one. Tee's falling off. This is a biggie. Get this one right and good things will start to happen. These 3 points, they're all important. Yeah, but this one, if I had to put one out as being number 1, this would be the one. Depth. Got to get some depth in the golf swing. So what am I classing as depth? Well, if we took a setup and we drew a line vertically up from the grip of the club, it's how much inwards that club moves, or that grip I should say, moves in the backswing. So this would be a swing with very little depth. I've got some upward, but no inward. So the grip is, give or take, probably directly above where it was at setup. This would be a golf swing where there's loads of depth. Okay, so you can see how the grippers, yes, it's also gone up into the air, but it's moved backwards behind me. That's a little extreme, but the more depth that we can create, the more chance we've got. The more chance we've got of hitting the ball from the inside, which is generally advisable, the more chance we've got of hitting the ball on the upswing, which again is something we want to try and do with a driver. And it gives you a greater chance of a freer release, which lets the toe turn over and lets that club face square up quite naturally. Now, how we use the lower body, which we've just covered, should allow us to get this good depth. But I just want you to have some really nice visuals over the golf ball. Those visuals are, you set up and you imagine that you're stood against a wall. So my heels are pretty much against a wall. And I don't want to be able to make a backswing without hitting the wall. Many of you would be able to do that. You would be able to make a golf swing where your hands are nowhere near that wall. I want you to try and make a backswing where your focus is to get the grip of the club onto that wall. And it's going to feel like you have to turn more. It's going to have to feel like you extend your arms out and away from your trail shoulder, creating some good width and some good extension. But it's the depth that we're after. That depth means I can rotate aggressively without the worry of the club kind of being thrown on the outside and coming over the top and creating those slices. This, as I say, is the big one. Get this right and you're going to feel like you've got so much more freedom, so much more room and so much more time to hit some drives. So let's go ahead and see if I can create that movement and hit one up this 3rd hole. Little turned over, but it should be around the corner, especially if it carries that bunker. Couldn't quite see. But those are 3 backswing changes which should be relatively easy to do, which will massively, massively improve your performance with a big stick.